Hi, everyone. So thanks for coming. And so I want to talk today a little bit about what comes next, what I think the future of this whole thing will be. And I picked this topic because it's obviously fun and maybe a little bit foolish. But I think before we get into that, it's worth taking a look at where we are now. So I'm not going to bore you with the usual 2009 Satoshi Nakamoto did blah, blah, blah. You've read it a million times in every white paper. But what I think is interesting is that on that day, we also had something else that we haven't fully appreciated yet. And that is, I think we have the very first immutable, indestructible global database. We've never had this before. If in the past you wanted to store some data, you would have to get some hardware or spin up a cloud server, an AWS server, and store it there. And you'd never be sure if that data was, how long it's going to persist, if it will be there tomorrow. But thanks to the incentive mechanisms built into Bitcoin and Ethereum, it's now possible to say with almost certainty that even if two continents of the world start to go to nuclear war with each other, there will still be enough surviving, provably accurate copies of the blockchain in existence. So what do we do with a immutable, indestructible database? Well, the first attempt to do something with it, of course, was Bitcoin. Simply create a currency out of thin air, a bit like the ones of the past, and put a number next to an account. Anyone can have any number of accounts and nobody knows who has what. Pretty soon later, we then had the idea of colored coins, the idea of digital assets, simple digital assets like gold bars, appearing on the Bitcoin blockchain. But it wasn't really until 2014 when I think things started to take off with the advent of Ethereum. At this point, we now had the ability to digitize anything and store arbitrary data on the blockchain. Of course, that's led to some amazing things already. And in fact, although it's no big thing for us that we have the ability to now have unlimited bank accounts through cryptocurrencies, it's certainly a big deal if you live in a country where you, if you're a woman, you cannot get a bank account unless your husband gives you approval. Or perhaps you have to walk 3 hours down a mountainside to go to the bank only to be told that you don't have enough money to open an account. So I think the blockchain's already given us some amazing achievements, and things that we can be proud of, but I think this is just the beginning. A lot of the attention at the moment is on tokens, and I think quite rightly so, because for all the hype around it, this is a chance for someone who has an idea to raise some money without having to trek all the way to Silicon Valley. And I think this is incredible. I think ICOs are kind of interesting to me, but what really interests me is the thought of micro ICOs in the future, when somebody in school will have a chance, will have a thought of forming a band, or starting an art exhibition and be able to raise a token for entry, or even a digital share one day with a few taps on their smartphone. So all of that's coming. So let's sort of start fast forwarding and think about the future a little bit more. In 6 months' time, I think we're going to see kids trading tokens in the classroom. I think that's all we're waiting at the moment for, is apps like Status, Cypher or Toshi to be sort of on the main chain and working really well, but that will come for sure. And I think in 2 to 3 years' time, a lot of the debate that we're currently having now about scalability will be over. The reason is, of course, is that everything that you see in the blockchain world is all open source. So it only takes one project to crack this problem and everybody else will copy the code and follow. For that reason, I think it's far more important when we're looking at different projects to think not about the scalability, but to think more about the philosophy and the underlying ethics, the core values of the project. Ethereum was put together by a group of what I believe to be amazingly well-intentioned people who think very deeply and care very deeply about the decentralized nature of their platform. We've seen a lot of other platforms that have different goals in mind. And I think it's going to be increasingly important in the future to start asking the founders what they believe in, what they will do when push comes to shove. And a national government says that sure, you can have ICOs, but you can only invest in them under a national ID system. Or perhaps what would happen if somebody places an image on the blockchain that you do not want on your computer, and half of the community want that image erased, and the other half say, no, it's immutable data, code is law, we're not going to change anything. So governance is going to become increasingly important. If we fast forward further on to the next sort of 5 to 10 years, I think we're going to be amused at what we see. I think kids will also be amused at their parents fumbling around trying to find letters 3 and 7 of their memorable word to log into an online banking website that rarely works and only gets to show them the money they never owned and controlled in the first place. And I think kids, when given the chance of owning and collecting and earning currencies that they can only spend in one country versus currencies that they can spend on the internet and then eventually globally through stores, well, there's not going to be much of a contest there either. So the most important thing for me, and the area that I work hardest in, is in the area of dApps and distributed apps, decentralized apps, I should say. And this has become very important in the last week when we start to see what big companies can do when they offer a very sort of walled garden, candy-like, beautiful experience, which is essentially sucking in all your private thoughts and memories. Bear in mind, our phones are extensions of our brains these days, into private databases where they can then monetize the data, frequently saying one thing and doing another. In the future, we will not need to use services like this because there will be really good working alternatives. However, once we have LinkedIn without the LinkedIn and WhatsApp without the WhatsApp, it's the same functionality but implemented in different ways, eventually we will be able to replace something like Facebook with a suite of different startups who are making decentralized applications. But that alone is not just the solution on its own, because it's also going to bring with it an interesting problem. What do we do when we have all this data and we have no way of curating it or filtering it out? I think we will then bizarrely start to appreciate some of the other things that these platforms do already today, which is they get rid of the offensive content that you do not want to see over the breakfast table. So we're going to have to devise new ways of doing this. We're going to have to start thinking more about reputation and perhaps thinking in ways of following people who you trust and who you trust not in terms of not only reputation, but in terms of taste as well. Taste is going to become increasingly important and a vital way that we're going to be able to filter out and tune out the stuff that we don't want to see in the future. I mentioned reputation because it's my belief that eventually that will become the currency that we trade in. I think once tokens blow over and we just accept that the world is going to be multi-currency and everyone's got a bunch of them, then what's really going to matter is what we store in terms of our reputation on the blockchain. And if you think about it at the moment, reputation is already important. If you've got a very low star rating for Uber, then an Uber cab is not going to come and pick you up. If you've got a very low rating on Airbnb, then you're going to probably have to pay a higher fee to stay in a hotel. But the problem with these ratings at the moment is that they're locked away in the squares on your phone. They cannot communicate with each other, and even though it's your data, you do not own and control your reputation in any way. So I think the future will be a future where all our messages, all our pictures, and all our relationships that we form online should become under our control, under our private keys. And the same goes for reputation too. And I think it would be very interesting and amazing in the future if you could just walk down a random street in any city in the world and stay at a stranger's house because you can prove with perhaps 200 pieces of data on the blockchain that you're a decent person, you're not going to wreck their home. Perhaps even you will stake some reputation on that. So as we start thinking about the more ethical issues and the philosophical issues of how we're going to live in the future, I think it's more important than ever to start looking at different platforms and what they believe, asking questions to founders about how they want the future to unfold. Today, you're going to see lots of amazing projects, not just projects that take the old world and copy it pixel by pixel and make it distributed and decentralized, but also projects that think about things in totally different ways. One of my favorites is Colony, which doesn't just look at work and try and copy work and put it on the blockchain. It tries to imagine a whole new world where we work in totally different ways. So what I ask of you is to realize that all of these founders are building rockets. Not rockets that fly to Mars like Elon Musk's rocket, but rockets that fire the imagination and take us into a different direction, take the course of history in a different direction. And if you are a founder, you are building the rockets and deciding where they point. If you're an engineer, you're working on the engines. But if you're an investor, you're the ones who are supplying the fuel to these rockets, deciding which ones get to fly and how far they go. So I believe that we are on the brink of something very special here. I've never been more excited to work in the area of technology. And I really can't wait to see what comes next. Thank you very much.